Existe un ejemplo humano de independencia musical y ese es Peanut Butter Wolf. Este empresario estadounidense es dueño del sello Stone's Throw Records, uno de los emprendimientos de música más importantes del mundo independiente. A través de sus sellos se ha cultivado una nueva generación de productores, rappers y artistas en general, inspirados por la aparición en el mundo de la música de transgresores talentos como Jay Dilla, Madlib y MF Doom. En esta conversación durante la cumbre celina de la música en Medellín, Peanut Butter Wolf se devuelve conmigo en el tiempo y cuenta su historia como productor, DJ y coleccionista de vinilos, y reflexiona sobre el presente de la independencia musical y también de la música comercial. Peanut Butter Wolf es mi invitado muy especial al episodio número 28 de El Podcast, por Canal 13.
It's good to have you in Medellín.
Yes, thank you. And you pronounce it Medellin? I've always been saying Medellin. I don't know.
Yeah, you can say it both
So
ways,
bad.
man. Especially now that Madonna's got that Maluma song that's called, and she says Medellin.
Oh,
So-
she does? Maybe that's why us dumb Americans.
Is this
She's
your
from
first time?
Detroit, I think, right?
Who, Madonna? Yeah, she's from Detroit.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
Detroit thing, maybe. Yeah.
What brings you here?
A show with these guys over here.
Cool. What show? The radio show.
Well, no, there's
Oh, you're gonna be performing a show at Selena.
we have a performance tomorrow, and then I'm doing like a kind of talk, I guess, with people too, in a Q&A. So
What are you guys gonna be talking about? Do you have any idea what?
probably the same thing that we talked with you about.
Yeah.
Just me. I don't know. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I mean, for those kind of things, I usually just tell my story, like, you know, from childhood to what I do now, because I've done the music thing since
You were
I was
a kid.
15. Yes, so
You were a kid. You started doing mixtapes and doing radio mocks.
yeah,
You know?
yeah, radio. Yeah, I did radio, like, I guess when I was like 19, maybe. Yeah.
But you did have a thing for it. You know, it was like I was watching our Vinyl Weighs a Ton. I watched
Oh,
it
cool.
when it came out
Nice.
a few years back. And then I watched it again before I knew you were coming.
So that makes me less nervous. That means you know some stuff already. So.
Oh, yeah, I do. I mean, I know a lot.
Now that makes me more nervous. No.
No,
No.
I mean,
So, yeah. For me, I mean, I started when I was like 14. I got my first turntables and my mixer, and you know, I was just really I was really intrigued by scratching. Like, I mean, hip hop, of course, but like I knew I wasn't a rapper, but I learned how to make beats and I learned how to scratch, and so I started working with rappers as a teenager.
But you were also very much into a lot of other stuff because the early tapes
was.
that are shown on our Vinyl Weighs a Ton
Yeah.
have you know, doing top 40 radio kind of stuff, you know, and presenting
Yeah.
R&B hits and things like that, right?
Right. Well, yeah. I guess when I was 12, I was like, all my records I was buying were like soul and funk and disco. And then I kind of learned about new wave and the British invasion, I guess, the second British invasion.
Yeah.
I learned about that and was really into like The Cure and New Order and groups, music like that. But then I also was into Run DMC and, you know, Schoolie D.
That makes you very unique in the sense that when it comes to emerging markets such as Colombia and Latin America and modern music, for a great part of the second half of the 20th century and the late 20th century, we're talking about the 80s, people in Medellin, people in Bogota, people in the big urban areas
Yeah.
would be beholden to a particular sound. They either be rock or punk.
Yes.
You know,
That was my high school in California as well. It was like that, and I wasn't really accepted by either because I liked both. So like people that liked hip hop, they're like, "Oh, he's weird. He dresses like, you know, The Cure." But then the alternative people, they're like, "Oh, he's weird. He likes hip hop." So it made me more of an outcast, I think, you know, in those years.
but there was also a turning point in American culture and in hip hop culture, and I remember this very well when I grew up, being brought up in South Florida, where kids would. One summer in 1990, they'd be wearing Nirvana T-shirts, and they'd be
Right.
wearing Pearl Jam T-shirts the next summer in 91. But then
Yeah.
in the summer of 92, all those kids, all those white kids, would
Yeah.
be wearing The Chronic.
Sure,
t-shirts,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was such a big turning point for me to see those kids turn into hip hop.
Well, I remember, I guess maybe in the late 90s, I remember hearing people say, like, like white, kind of nerdy white people saying, I don't like hip hop, but I like the Beastie Boys. It's like, okay. Or, like they would like Jurassic 5 a lot. There was like certain like groups that, Public Enemy was like really like crossed over into like anarchist kind of like rock, punk, kind of punk
Yeah, because he
scene
did
as well.
the Anthrax thing back in '89.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But even just having Rick Rubin, working with them back then and stuff too, like their stuff was very abrasive and like, just hard and raw. It was good shit.
And Rubin was also into the metal thing.
Yeah.
He had that
first
Slayer thing going on.
Yeah,
right?
Slayer, yeah.
And why do you think it turned mainstream? Why do you think, was it because white people finally just adopted it and turned it into
with hip hop or with what?
Yeah, with hip hop.
Possibly, yeah. It is a racial thing, but also I think before hip hop was all New York, and like the West Coast. Me liking hip hop as a kid, I only cared for stuff from New York, and then in around '85, Egyptian Lover came out, and like the West Coast hip hop was like a lot faster, and it was like a lot more electronic. It was more like influenced by the song Planet Rock.
Did it all begin with that, with Africa Bambaataa?
I think the West Coast electro did for sure. Yeah, an Electric Kingdom, a song Electric Kingdom. There were a few songs. Well, so yeah, the Bambaataa song was first, and then a lot of other people like Nucleus were doing stuff like that, like kind of electronic hip hop. Everything got like more drum machine and synthesizers. Before that, it was all like kind of disco rhythms and on the records and stuff. But I don't know. I feel like I'm like trying to say like a history of hip hop now, and I wasn't even there when it happened. So
yeah, but it doesn't. But it doesn't really matter because even if you don't want to talk about the history of hip hop before you are part of the history of hip hop,
Yeah. No, I just feel hypocritical because I didn't live in New York. But like growing up in San Jose, California, which is next to San Francisco, West Coast. We loved all the New York stuff at that time. And then when West Coast rappers started coming out, most of them I wasn't really listening to. This was probably in the mid '90s. Like when Dre came out. Even like NWA, I wasn't like a big fan of NWA as much as I was of like Brand Nubian and like Lakim Shabazz and De La Soul, like, a lot of X-Clan. There's like a lot of East Coast stuff that was more interesting to me at the time.
The kind of eclecticism in hearing music, and particularly hip-hop, which was definitely on its way to mainstream status through gangster rap and the influence of New York hip-hop. How does it come about? Because it seems to me like it was definitely alternative.
Mm-hmm. No, I know. And like, honestly, like going back, I like a lot of the gangster stuff too. I'm not a gangster, but I listen to it with an open ear for what it is. And like musically, I like it. And I like how they're speaking about what they know and stuff. It's not like, even like Schoolie D, like I was 15 and I was listening to Schoolie D and he was just talking about dogging women and like doing drugs. And I wasn't really doing that stuff. Or, I didn't have a gun or anything, but it just, to me, it was more like watching a movie, like, just like not like a reality thing.
Yeah.
Not like it would influence me to do those things, but yeah.
And another thing that I wanted to ask to begin our conversation has to do with the fact that over the course of 30 years, hip-hop culture in Colombia has really been influenced by East Coast dark kind of golden era hip-hop.
Like the Wu-Tang kind of...
The Wu-Tang, and a little bit before that, you'd have the Eric B. and Rakim's being influential also. You'd have
Rakim's still my favorite. Like,
yeah, he's amazing.
For what he did at that time, like he really changed hip hop. But go ahead, I cut you off.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. You can cut me off anytime, man. And I guess one of the reasons I really wanted to do this interview and meet you, and that I spoke to the people at the channel, at the network, and at the newspaper was like, you really have to hear this guy talk, because there's something missing in the knowledge and the education around hip hop that we need to inform our kids and our young adults. And it's this Bay Area movement, you know, which really grabbed the attention of a few people who, if they allow me to be politically incorrect, I would say that we're a little bit more educated than those others who were influenced by those very roots of hip hop, Run DMC and B and Rakim, and then the Wu-Tang Clan and Mobb Deep and things like that. But not a lot of people still don't know. A lot of people still don't know what it was like in the Bay Area. And I would love for you to tell us a bit more about how that came about.
It was so fun for me. There was a magazine called The Bomb, hip hop magazine. It was like a little black and white magazine, and more newspaper format, I guess. And, you know, the source was kind of, at that point, the source was like more about like, it got a little more commercialized. So this magazine in the Bay, they were like kind of more like what hip hop used to be, I guess. And they would throw these shows all the time. So they would have, like, I opened for Nas, you know, when he only had one song out. So they would bring some New York artists, or, but yeah, there was a whole Bay Area scene as well. I mean, it was most known are probably like the Hieroglyphics, Souls of Mischief, and even
they
that.
Were beautiful.
Like nowadays, if you say that name, no one will know what it is. But if they hear the song 93 to Infinity, they'll go, oh, that song sounds familiar. So.
That was a crazy hit back in the 90s, man.
Yeah.
It was such a beautiful song. Yeah, and the whole album was just so special.
Absolutely.
It was so different to what was going on.
Yeah.
And it appealed to a few people only as well.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, well, they had fans. Yeah. They had a lot of fans. And they even do a festival, and it influenced me, like, seeing their festival. They had me play at their festival, and there were two Bay Area movements, because there was like the more G-funk kind of gangster rap. I mean, that kind of came out of Too Short. I mean, Too Short wasn't really like glorifying violence as much as just like being a pimp or whatever, you know. But there was that, and E40 was part of that. You know, those were probably the two big names. But there were a lot of like RBL Posse and Mac Mall and Mac Dre, just like, yeah, there was a lot of like street stuff that was like its own thing, that was more keyboards and synthesizers and gangster lyrics. And then there was the more like kind of traditional, rooted in New York stuff. And that was like all of California. Like the Far Side were from California, but they had more of like an East Coast sound to them. So they sampled a lot of old records, and you know, the lyrical content was different. Or like Freestyle Fellowship was another one that was like one of my favorites at that time. So even though we were all West Coast, there were two different West Coast scenes going on, I guess.
Did the flow differentiate you guys? Was the flow different?
The flow was a lot different, yeah. Yeah, but then there was like a group like Hobo Junction that was kind of in the middle. They were almost like kind of gangster and kind of lyrical as well. So
how did it distance itself from the current state of sampling back in those days? How was it different from what was going on in the New York era at the end of the 80s?
Well, I think even like, so like a lot of the G-Funk, it was like taking songs that were already known, that were already a hit, and then kind of maybe replaying them on the keyboard. So taking like Parliament, Funkadelic, George Clinton, you know, those kind of groups or those kind of artists, or like a group One Way. It was like, whereas New York hip hop in the 90s, they were sampling like James Brown, and then like just rare versions of James, like not only James Brown, but like a lot of groups from the 60s. And then the West Coast was kind of just going back only like 5 years or something, and that got kind of ridiculed sometimes by the East Coast people, like, oh, you're not even like digging in the crates, you're just like you're finding something that's obvious. And then Diddy kind of did that, and it, you know, I mean, like using like I'm Coming Out by Diana Ross or something like that, and it was just like huge on the radio, you know.
when do you start digging in the crates?
86 for me. So I started buying records in 79 when I was 9 years old. I was buying records every weekend. I would buy a 45 because that's all I could afford. The little records, they were only $1 each. So I would save my lunch money. I wouldn't eat. You know, I would just starve. My mom would give me $1 every day for school, and I would save it, and then I would buy records on the weekend. And so,
was she okay with that?
She didn't know. So, but then by 86, like I really started, you know, like the song Peter Piper by Run DMC, they sampled the Bob James, and it's like, what is that? Where's that coming from? That's so cool. And there was a book by a guy, David Toop. I don't remember the name of the book, but I bought that book, and it would say all the names of the samples. So I had like a little piece of paper. I'd write them all, and I'd have them in my wallet. And whenever I'd go to a record store, I'd look for those ones, and I could never find them. And and then every now and then, when I would find like a Jimmy Castor or some, you know, like It's Just Begun or something like that, I'd be so excited. So, and then the Ultimate Breaks and Beats came out, and then it made it a lot easier for everybody. Like,
what was Breaks and Beats?
Ultimate Breaks and Beats is a compilation series from the mid '80s that pretty much has every sample that any hip hop artist had used. So, or it would also just be like rare stuff that would be cool to sample. So, as a hip hop producer, before you would have to just really look and just try hard to find samples. And then when these compilations came out, anybody from anywhere in the U.S. would sample from these, and it would still sound like New York hip hop. So, I think that breakbeat series, that compilation series, it was basically like various artists, but it was a bootleg, so it wasn't
exactly legal.
Yeah, I guess they cleared the publishing, but they didn't. I don't know. They got around some stuff and knew what they were doing, but it was basically like the NWA album that we were talking about earlier. Like that's mostly samples from the Ultimate Breaks and Beats, and a lot of the New York hip hop was as well. So that was kind of, those compilations were kind of bringing everybody together.
As your collection starts getting bigger, and you start finding the music that's inspiring these new beats,
Yeah.
what happens to your musical taste, and what happens with that music? Do you start appreciating the music for what it was, you know, listening to the entire songs? Does your collection grow bigger because you want to open your horizons musically, or is the purpose of moving ahead in your collection just finding different sounds to create new music?
I mean, I don't really create new music with I don't make music anymore so much. I am in the studio with a lot of the groups on my label, but it is more for buying the songs and just discovering things.
But for like back in those days when you start working with Charisma.
Oh, I was always looking for stuff to sample and make my own hip hop, for sure. Absolutely.
What were the very first things that you remember that connected you with Charisma and with the vinyl that you were buying and sampling?
What I think really connected us most is we both wanted to take chances and be different. We didn't really want to like fit in with like the norm. So I would sample from like strange records that you wouldn't expect people to sample from. And, you know, Charisma was always encouraging that. And even like my name was Chris Cut. And then I was in a punk band called Peanut Butter Wolf, and then he said, that should be your DJ name. And like in hip hop, that would be really weird and stupid to do that. But it was like, okay, yeah, let's do it. Let's just be punk rock about it and do something different.
Wow. So, and how did that go?
I mean, I didn't think I would have that name like 30 years later. So
it's crazy, man. He was brilliant, you know.
Yeah, he was really, I mean, he was 20 years old when he died, so just, you know, he was a teenager when we did all our music.
What happened to him?
He was killed. He was basically robbed, and someone, it was a setup. They knew he had money, and they tried to rob him, and he had a gun as well, so they shot each other, and Charisma died, and the other guy lived.
How did that affect you?
I mean, it still affects me, yeah. At that time, yeah, I wasn't really prepared for it. You know, I was in my early 20s as well. So,
Did you think about quitting?
oh yeah, I did quit for a while. I mean, I didn't. Yeah, I wasn't thinking about music or anything. I was just thinking about, you know.
How'd you get back?
I wasn't even really thinking. I was like depressed. It was definitely like a depression thing for a while, and then I realized that making music helped me like deal with losing my friend.
How did you start over again? Where, I guess, with whom?
It wasn't with whom. It was just I was just making music for myself. I really enjoyed it, and then eventually I had a lot of songs, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do like an instrumental record. I don't want to be part of a group anymore, because we were like a group. So it was more instrumentals, and then eventually I started meeting rappers that I liked, and I was making a song with this person, a song with that person. Never like a full project with one person, but.
I find it fascinating that you decided to do an instrumental record. I gravitate towards instrumental stuff because of people like you, because of what the Beasties did back in the 90s. And I've always found it fascinating when a musician decides, or a producer decides, to do instrumentals, because I find it so hard. So it's so hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, part of why I did, I think, was because I had lost my friend that I was doing the music with, so I didn't want to do that. But also, the record I made, it was called Peanut Butter Breaks, and it was almost, well, I noticed that a lot of this was when the breakbeats were getting popular, and people would buy records just to sample them. And so I would have, each song had like an open drum break on it, but then it was musical and stuff too. So I kind of made it as something that you could play out in a club, and then also something where you could sample if you're a producer. So club DJs and music makers could both buy this record. And then it ended up people just bought it to listen to it, and that was something I didn't even think about.
Did this first exercise become, as people would say today, viral? Did it reach beyond?
It did. And there was in that magazine I was telling you, The Source, there was a store that would take out ads, and they would write all the breakbeats that were popular in their store. Somehow this record started doing well in a store in New York, and for me that was a dream come true, because like hip hop started in New York, and that was like all I wanted, was to be accepted by people in New York.
And those beats made it to other musicians and other songs?
Yeah, it was a lot of people sampled the beats. Even in like pop records, this group Incubus, they were kind of like a pop rock record. They sampled one of my tracks, and then this group Garbage. There was a movie called Romeo and Juliet in the U.S. that was
Number
big.
One Crush?
Yeah, that song was sampled from my beat, like from my record.
That's crazy.
So.
Were you already building your label?
This was, yes and no, actually. So I did that breakbeat record in '94. Charisma died in '93. I did the breakbeat in '94, and then in '96 I started Stone's Throw. But the breakbeat was also my own label, but I called it Heyday Records, but I didn't know there was a rock label called Heyday, so then I changed it to Stone's Throw.
Okay.
So.
Did you have a lot of problems with licensing and clearances, and how influential would you say you are in the new licensing of old music?
Yeah, the licensing have never been that big of a problem. I mean, I'm still here. Like, the label hasn't folded, so sometimes we don't know what the samples are from. When I say we, like, let's say an artist gives me an album and I want to put it out, and he doesn't remember where he sampled from, I'll just take a risk and still put it out and deal with the people when they come and tell me, hey, you sampled our stuff. So.
Yeah, well, I guess my question has to do with my curiosity for what it was like back in those days, because I know that James Brown and the Meters and many others started just asking for their rights to.
Yeah, and of course they deserve
the credit.
A credit and some of the money, but then it's just like how much money is like really fair, and like. I would so before I started my label, I was signed to Hollywood Records, which is Walt Disney's record label. and they would clear every single sample. And like in a song, I would sample from like maybe 5 different things, and one person wanted 50% of the song, someone wanted 25, someone wanted 33, and then pretty soon we're like there's like there's more than 100% being taken from everybody, so it's impossible. So that song gets shelved, and that happened a lot in hip hop. A lot of times, songs didn't come out because there were so many samples in one song.
What made you want to start a record label?
In high school, I wanted to start a label. There were a lot of, so at that point, all the records that I was buying were coming out on independent labels. It was very rare that you would find anything good on a major label. So it was like, I think that's where all these people with the screw the majors thing came from is, even when hip hop started, it was the coolest stuff was on independent labels. So it glamorized it for me as a kid. Like, that's what I want to do when I grow up.
When you start the label, what are the challenges back in 95, 96?
Yeah, well, I had a lot of challenges at that point. I lived in the Bay Area in San Francisco, so there was no music industry there really. So, most of the music industry in the U.S. was in New York and L.A. I didn't have the connections. I mean, I started the label with no money, so I pretty much had to sign it. I didn't have to, but I chose to sign a deal where the distributor was getting the majority of the money, and me as the label wasn't really seeing that much money. And then, so when I was paying my artists, they weren't seeing that much money either. So it was kind of frustrating for everybody. And eventually I found when I built my power up, I found another distributor that gave me a deal that was more, more even, like not all in their favor. So I would say, and that's what I tell people who want to start something, like, it's okay to give your stuff away for less than it's what you think it's worth, like, as long as it's not like a long-term thing, I mean, just to get your foot in the door.
Yeah. When do you start working with rappers again? Right after?
With Stone's Throw, I did. Well, I did an EP in 1995 called Step on Our Egos, and that was 6 songs. Each song had a different rapper, and I did all the music. So that was probably when I started working with other people again.
Who did you start working with?
There was a rapper, 50 Grand, from this group Homeless Derelicts. It's all people that that nobody really knows nowadays, or even then.
But it's kind of like the nature and the essence of Stone's Throw in a way.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you get the Madlibs, and you get the Quasimodos, and you get the Dillas,
Absolutely.
and you get the big, I guess, the legendary acts of Stone's Throw.
I only work with legends.
But you go into the website, and there's so much going on that you don't know about. I was at the South by Southwest showcase.
Yeah.
Okay. A year ago.
Yeah.
And there was this kid there, doing a little bit of R&B and working his way with a little bit of that Mayer Hawthorne flavor. But
Stimulator Jones, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating about the label, finding so much talent.
I'm in a great position now because of knock on wood, because the stuff that I put out in the past. There are a lot of artists who want to work with me because of, well, I'll be on the same label as this person was on, or whatever, or they trust that I helped promote that artist to, like when I signed Anderson .Paak, that was before Dre ever knew who he was. And, I saw him play at a venue that there were probably like 50 people in the show, and like nobody knew who he was. And he agreed to work with us because of the stuff that we did before with other people. So.
Of course. How do you approach an artist when you find yourself interested? What do you say to him?
I just say, hey, I like your shit. I don't know. I mean, it's always different. I mean, usually, most of the artists that we work with already know who Stone's Throw is and know who I am. So it's,
That's another thing that I want to talk about, and it's that bright, brilliant moment of hip-hop that changes everything from 96 on. Mm-hmm. And it's that moment where Doom appears and Dilla appears, and I'd like you to tell me a bit about that story, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of the people who I spoke to at the channel and the people that I talked to in Bogota and said, I'm going to meet Peanut Butter Wolf, and they were like, who's that guy now? And I would say, Dilla. And they would say, oh, okay. You know,
Yeah.
so it'd be great if you told us a little bit about that story.
Well, Dilla I'd known since I put out the Peanut Butter Breaks in '94. Like he bought that record, and this guy House Shoes, he worked at a record store, and he would call me to buy my record. House Shoes would call him, I need more copies of the Peanut Butter Breaks, and then he would always tell me about this guy JD, who later changed his name to J Dilla, but he was always like, you got to hear JD. His beats are so, it's just like what you guys do. Like, I think you'll really like it, you know. I mean, it was better than what we did, but it was like the same style. So, yeah, so I knew him for a long time. And then, but he was signed, well, first he did the Slum Village stuff, and, you know, and he had Q-Tip was his manager from Tribe Called Quest. So
Okay.
he was kind of linked in with everybody. Like, I think that's how he met, like, D'Angelo and Erykah Badu and, you know, De La Soul and whoever, like all the groups he was working with.
He was also from Detroit, right?
He was from Detroit, yeah.
Does he move to LA when he starts working with you? How does
He
that?
actually eventually did, and I couldn't believe it because he was always like Detroit. He would wear Detroit hats, and, you know, everyone, like, his lyrics would be about Detroit. And then one day, you know, I'm skipping around, but this was probably like early mid 2000s. He was like, "Hey," he called me up. He's like, "Wolf, you're not gonna believe this. I'm moving to LA." And so LA from Detroit is like probably 5 hours in an airplane. You know, it's pretty far. And he did, yeah. He moved to LA. He said he was going to move there and be Common's roommate, and Common kind of took him in, and because at that point Common was becoming successful with the acting and, you know, his music as well at that point.
Did you ever feel during the beginning of your career that did you ever have that grain of mustard that sometimes the scriptures talk about, that you were going to change the world of hip hop like you did, how you did it? Was there a point in, whether it was in your childhood or your teenage?
I never believed in myself that way. I always felt like, oh, I'm onto something great, but I had such negative feedback growing up from people that it was like, I always felt like, well, I'm great, but no one understands it. You know, it was kind of like a teenager kind of thing. And even, yeah, but like, so for example, like with Quasimodo, when we put that out, I was like, this is the best album, but no one's going to understand it. And we're not going to sell that many because good music doesn't sell. And, you know, but, and it didn't sell that much. I mean, it's not like a household name, but you'd be surprised how many people have a Quasimodo tattoo on their arm. And that, like, to me, that's pretty special, or pretty, you know.
It's special. It's
That someone would do that, like just a lifelong thing, like, you know.
And not only when they tattoo it, you know, it's the way people talk about that Quasimodo record nowadays and how it's ingrained in underground culture all across the world. I mean, you know, because when you started working on the record and you say this record is really good and people aren't going to understand it, maybe you were right about it not selling.
Well, I kind of felt like some people would. Yeah, I never really cared about the masses as much as, like, as long as, like, people whose opinion that I really respected and admired, like Stretch and Bobbito, like, I really wanted them to like it and they didn't like it, so I was upset.
You gotta be kidding me. Bobbito Garcia did not like the Quasimodo. Oh,
Bobbito
man.
didn't at the time, but he was just like, oh, I'm just not feeling the voice, it's too weird, or something, or it's just too, he didn't even say it was too weird.
He was always in New York, right?
Yeah.
They were both in New York.
Yeah, they were in New York, and the documentary on them is really cool, by the way.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And he saw me after I went to the screening of the documentary, and he's like, I'm so glad that I saw you, because I saw the documentary on Stone's Throw, and that made me think of doing the documentary on Stretch and Bobbito. So
It's also really cool that you mention things not selling, and also how there's a difference between what sells and what's really good. Because as the world advances, and now that streaming culture is taking over, 15 years into the entire collapse of the major record industry and the anarchy that took over through P2P file sharing and all that stuff, and how it revolutionized music.
Yeah.
We're back to square one. We're consuming a lot of shit. We're consuming a lot of
there's
garbage.
so much.
And but
But
yet,
there's some cool stuff out there for sure.
right. But if you look back, you'll find yourself with the paradox that you faced. Having great stuff, signing great musicians, being surrounded by beautiful artists,
Yeah.
and not selling a lot, because in the end, that's not really what makes music important.
No.
Is it?
No, not at all. And I mean, Tribe Called Quest did very well. And so to me, that was like, okay, there are some artists that are making good music and they actually have fans, and that them and Wu-Tang Clan were like the inspiration for me, like that it actually could happen, even if you do make music that's edgy or not like just so typical or whatever.
Yeah. And it's also funny that you started doing tapes kind of mocking the top 40 radio stuff, but you gravitated towards a completely left of center kind of thing.
Sure. Well, those tapes, I mean, the records that I bought, they were like, there was a lot of, I mean, I basically had like every soul and funk record that was out at that time. And like, I was a 9-year-old that would go in the record store and the owner would be like, this is so weird. Like, this little white boy knows this stuff. Like, how do you know it so well? And she said, when you're old enough to work, we're going to hire you. And she did. So like that was like one of my first jobs, was working at that record store.
But the obscurity that has fed.
But it was obscure though. I mean, I had a lot of obscure stuff at that point.
I know. And that obscurity fed a lot of what the mainstream finally guzzled itself. It kind of glorified in the clandestine nature of lots of the repertoire that took place in Stone's Throw Records over the course of the end of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
But it took many years, a lot of like Doom and Dilla, those are the names that, and Madlib, those are the three names that come up the most with Stone's Throw. And none of those artists did that well when we first put them out. It took a while for people to like the word of mouth to spread. I didn't have like the big promotional budgets, and even with promotional, we did like, so with Jay Dilla and Madlib did an album together, and Dilla was like, whatever you want to do, like I'm like okay with it. So we spent more money on a video than we normally would, because this is Dilla and this is so great. We're gonna get played on national TV with this. I can see it, and it didn't happen. Or we would take out a full page ad in the source, and that didn't help at all. Like the money that we spent trying to reach the masses doing our brand of what we think is good music, it didn't even help. Like, and Mad Villain, we put out at the same year, and we didn't spend any money on anything, and that one kind of took off, just word of mouth.
Yeah.
So.
Now that you mentioned promotion and marketing, does word of mouth, can word of mouth be helped by marketing? Did you?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Did you do anything in particular with the Madlib record, with the Mad Villain record, to get the word out there?
I think what really helped us the most was Adult Swim in those years. The people in charge of the music at Adult Swim, they were like, this music is perfect for our show. This like speaks to us. And I didn't even know what Adult Swim was. They called me up and they're like, we want to put your music in the show and whatever. And
how did they get there? How did they get to you?
Probably just through the website.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, but what I learned was people that were into Adult Swim, they were into counterculture. They and so it was such an easy way to reach people who had a hunger for underground music.
Yeah, it was very important to a generation. Adult Swim was really important to a generation of kids, man. Yeah. It was like my little sister is like, she gets to you through Adult Swim.
Yeah.
She was brought up in Kentucky, and she mentions a lot about how she came about, MF Doom and
Right.
and Mad Villainy and things like that. When it comes to Dilla and the sound that you say was very much like what every single one of you guys was doing, which was very similar, what sets him apart? Or what set him apart?
Set Dilla apart?
Yeah, what set Dilla apart, given the fact that you just mentioned that, we were all doing this kind of the same thing?
You just have to listen to the songs, and I never can really put that in words, like what makes it great to me. It's just like when you hear it, you know it, I don't know.
Because he crossed over anyway. He did cross over, didn't he?
He did, and at that time, he was getting a lot of work, in the early 2000s with everybody, and Madlib wasn't getting any work. Like, Madlib was just, and, I wrote an email to the head of Motown Records, like, hey, I see that you work with Jay Dilla, you should also listen to Madlib, and, I would try to do things like that, and it never really panned out, but like De La Soul, for example, they chose a Madlib track, and then Madlib, he gives you the song as it is, and without getting too technical, like, most people, they'll send a song separated to the artist, so the drums are on one track, the bass is on one track, the keyboard's on one track. Madlib never did it that way. He was like, no, I don't want anybody mixing my stuff. This is the instrumental. You just have to rap over it the way it is. And most artists were like, I'm not going to do that. So, and even like someone like Radiohead hit us up and was like, we want a Madlib remix. And they sent us their music, and Madlib just never did it. So it was like little things like that, Madlib was never really into like what success, like what mainstream's idea or what the average person's idea of success is. To him, success was just continuing to make his music the way he wanted to make it, and just like being financially secure, basically.
And he was he?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I mean, he was. Yeah. I mean, the early days he was broke. I mean, I was broke too. I mean, I wanted a SP1200 drum machine, and I did a track for this guy, and he sent me one in return, this artist that was bigger than we were, and then I let Madlib borrow it, and Madlib needed money one day and put it in the pawn shop and didn't tell me, and then he never paid the pawn shop back, and then it just got taken away, and so I lost my drum machine. I was like, oh man, I wish you would have told me. I would have paid for it or whatever, but I didn't have that much money at that point either, and
is there a particular time for nowadays for a business when it comes to the record industry or record label? If I want to start a record label, would you recommend a certain span of time to wait until you make it? Or
there's no way to know. I mean, it's different for everybody. Yeah, the thing is you can't really predict what people are going to gravitate to. You can never predict what's going to be a hit. It's just you just put out. I mean, that's why for me, I just put out what I like, and then if some of it, does well, then that's even better. But I mean, my job when I sign an artist is to try to reach as many people as possible, and try to see what their goals are and help them achieve those goals.
After Dilla's passing, what happens? What happens for you? What happens for the label?
When Dilla was alive, he did stuff for the label, but none of it really defined the label so much. I think what really defined the label most from Dilla was Donuts, and that was released
in 2006, was it?
Yeah, but it was released 3 days before he died.
Yeah.
We put the record out, and then he passed away. Nobody, was prepared to lose him. So even though he was doing tours with us, he was on the road with us for J-Lib, and he was like stone's throw, it was like my home. But yeah, so I guess to answer the question, yeah, it was a situation where when he was alive and we had Donuts, which, Donuts is an instrumental hip-hop record, and at that point, like, our record distributor was like, well, this record's not going to sell because instrumental hip hop doesn't sell. And I'm like, well, you know, they were comparing it to other things where the music was not nearly as like.
What were they comparing it to? How could it be?
I don't even know the artist. It was just like, yeah, most people back then would put out an instrumental hip hop album just to make a little bit of extra money or something, and it wasn't like they weren't putting like their all into it. Or, you know, not Madlib. Dilla's instrumental hip hop record was, you could listen to it. Like a lot of the hip hop records would just be a loop of one thing over and over, and Dilla's was a lot more arranged. There was like arrangements where things would come in and out, and so you could kind of listen to it by itself. You wouldn't need a rapper or a singer on top of it.
Yeah.
And that's why I asked him. I said, let's just put this out as is, like, and yeah, I don't know.
It's funny because when you approach Donuts, you know you're listening to something incomparable, especially if you didn't hear it right when it was released. For many of us, the experience of listening to Stone's Throw has come about after it has influenced many others, either before us or around us. Especially for us, you know, commercial radio folk and guys who are just enthusiasts of other forms of hip hop.
Yeah.
And I know it's pretty hard for you to put it into words, but it's still a question that I would love to put on the table and share with you, even if it has no answer, because another example of how influential those records have been is MF Doom's way of rapping and approaching hip hop. You know, and it's another reason why I decided to come and look for you, because I really feel like hip hop fans out there in Colombia who are going to be watching this interview will gravitate towards this stuff, and many of them will get hooked, and many of them will probably be influenced by it in the same way that it influenced a generation of kids back in 2006, 2007 when those records came out. In the case of Doom, you know, I find it interesting that young people around me also have no words to define how important it was in the construction of a new rhetoric, if you will. You know, what was it about food? Was that the name of the album? Or
Mad Villainy was one that we did. Food was another one that he did.
Okay.
Food was like his solo record, and Mad Villainy was with Madlib and Doom together.
What was it about it, in your words, if you could find them?
Well, I was really influenced by Doom from KMD, which was a group that he did in the 90s, and that record didn't do well at all.
Yeah.
When he did the KMD record, I loved it, and yeah, all the Keep It Real hip hop fans, I guess, like the ones that were looking for the different stuff, we all were really into it, but it didn't. That was on a major label, and it didn't do very well on the major, and I think they got dropped from the label, and then his brother passed away, who was in the group, and you know, a lot of time went by where he wasn't really doing music anymore, and then he came up with this record, and well, no, he probably was doing music the whole time, but he just didn't. It was before the independent labels kind of started springing up in 96, 97, and he did this one album, a solo album that Madlib and I would always really listen to, and when we DJ'd together at a club, we would always that would be one of the records that we would both have in our stacks that we would play. So, you know, if he played it, I'd be like, oh man, I wanted to play it, but that's cool. At least it got played tonight. And so, we reached out to him, and, you know, his stuff, the Mad Villain and the MF Doom stuff, did much better than KMD ever did. You know, and it just, I don't think anyone planned it that way. It just happened. Yeah.
It's great to have you in Medellin. It's great to have you in Colombia. It's great to meet you. It is an honor.
Thank you.
You are legendary. Thank you very much for being here. What are your plans for the rest of 2019?
Oh, I thought you were going to say that my plans out here for the next 2 days. 2019, yeah, just continue putting out music. I'm getting married this year, so that's part of the plan.
Congratulations on
you.
that.
Yeah.
Looking forward to seeing you tonight and the rest of the show and the talks at Selena. Once again,
I hope
it's
you
an
can
honor.
make it out to the show. Thank you.
It's an honor to meet you.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Este programa fue financiado a través de los recursos del Fondo para el Desarrollo de la Televisión y los Contenidos de la Autoridad Nacional de Televisión.